Hi, I'm Murray Feldman, and I'm with Joseph Borg, who is the Securities Administrator in the state of Alabama, also the President of the North American Securities Administrators Association. Thank you for being here with us.
A real pleasure.
You are the guy, and your people are the people who protect us and make sure that nobody's taking advantage of us financially.
Well, you know, we try very hard. It's our mission to protect investors in each of the states. So there's a securities regulator in each of the states, and we do have multiple role functions, primary of which is make sure the industry is doing right by the citizens of our state. But our second part is to make sure that the industry itself, we do things for them as well. By keeping bad folks out, not only are we protecting our citizens, but we're actually helping the industry.
All right, you have been called Wall Street's biggest nightmare.
Oh, geez.
I don't want to embarrass you, but that's meant as a compliment. What bad things are you seeing out there that you prosecute, that you bring in, that we need to be aware of?
You know, on the senior level, which is probably the biggest area right now, a lot of the states, for example, the NASAA organization, a few years ago, really got on the curve when they said, let's make this a priority. For example, in my state, I'm one of the very first states that passed a law that required financial advisors, you know, stockbrokers, the investment advisors, the financial planners, that if they suspected financial exploitation of a senior or somebody who needed the help, you have to report it. Now think about this. If you're in a hospital and you fall out of bed, what do they have to do? They got to report it. If an assisted living place sees something wrong, they got to report it. Physical therapists, you fall, you hurt yourself, got to report it. If you're in a nursing home and somebody thinks, well, you got bed sores, you got this, somebody's not taking care of you, what do you got to do? You got to report it. So why isn't the entire financial aspect of your future life that you're going to depend on not as important as falling out of bed?
You have changed that in the state of Alabama.
We have.
But it's not universal. It's not nationwide.
Well, you know, 17 states over the last couple of years have now went that route. Now, what's really interesting is the federal government, and I'll give a lot of credit to Maine and Susan Collins, Senator Collins, that concept is now the Senior Safe Act, which was passed about a month and a half ago. It's a little different. My state, we mandate the reporting. The federal does not mandate. Now, the good thing about that from my point of view is there's a little clause in there, because we insisted upon it, that if there's a state that has a law that's equivalent or better, it doesn't preempt. So in my state, we have set up a system where a financial professional, stockbroker or whatever, and the typical ones we see are like this. Mrs. Smith has been taking out $1,200 a month from her account for years. $1,200, $1,400 if she needs a new roof, maybe a little bit more. And that's been going on and on and on. She's a single, you know, she's in her 80s, her husband left an estate, or she had an estate, whatever. And all of a sudden it goes from $1,200 to $2,200 in a month. Maybe an unusual item. Then it goes to $30. Now it's going to $2,200 a week. What is going on? Do you suspect, Mr. Stockbroker, Mr. Financial Planner, Mr. Investment Advisor, that maybe something's wrong here? Yes. Report it. You know what we find out? It could be a grandson, a grandchild. It could be a family member. She could be under duress. Maybe somebody's got a drug problem.
So somebody has to watch what comes and goes in these accounts and be accountable for it and probe it. In the facility, in the brokerage, in the bank, in the credit union, wherever they are.
So what we're doing is we're helping to monitor seniors to make sure they're not being taken advantage of in a nursing home, at a doctor's office, in a hospital, in the bank accounts, in your investment accounts. And so what we've done with the law, like I said, 17 states have now passed something similar, and now it's going national except for that mandatory piece I told you about. What's going to happen now is that when we get those reports, a report goes to Adult Protective Services. In my state, they're called DHR, Department of Human Resources, and a copy comes to me. But we did an incentive for the brokers. They get qualified immunity from any lawsuits for like privacy concerns and things like that, because that's the big thing. I'm letting out this privacy information.
So in other words, they can tell on a fellow broker.
Well, they can tell on reporting information on somebody's account.
Okay.
which is private. And if they see something else, they can also report. Could it be a fellow broker? Yes, it could.
What if they don't do it?
Well, if they don't do it, that's a big question still in the law. Certainly there could be some responsibility. But I think at this point we're still trying to get the impetus going so that everybody's on the same page.
All right, so it's all about protecting us.
It's all about protecting.
And you're working from within to make sure the people in that facility watch out for us, watch out for bad apples that may be working with them, and eventually we'll have to report it.
Well, they will. If it's a mandatory reporting, if you suspect that there's been some sort of exploitation about to happen, going on, or has happened, then report it. And for that, you get the broker who reports it, gets some protection. Unless you're a criminal, of course, in which case that doesn't count.
All right. Well, that's one of the things we have to watch out for is the phantom activity on our account.
Well, you have things like folks who have turned over their account to their kids, and then the kids decide, well, I'm not going to wait for the inheritance, I'm going to start taking some money.
You see that happening.
We see that happening. You see the kids who, maybe the grandchild or something, or maybe they've taken in a grandchild. The grandchild gets on drugs or something like that, and now the grandmother is afraid not to give the money because there may be a physical abuse factor. Look, when it comes to abuse, whether it's physical, mental, they're all connected in some cases. But we also see things like the romance scams. Now, these are one of the hardest ones for us to prove because somebody's lonely, somebody hasn't paid attention to somebody in their 70s, 80s, whatever it may be. And maybe the cognitive skills aren't quite as sharp as they used to be. And then they're on, one of these social websites, and next thing you know, they're corresponding with somebody. I had a fella a week ago who sent $90,000. Now, his wife had passed away not too long ago. He's depressed. Ran up his credit cards, took money out of his bank account on what he thought was a lady overseas. He was going to get her out of trouble, and then she's going to come, and they're going to, get together. Chances are this money's been routed to somewhere in, Eastern Europe or someplace in Africa.
So, Joe, the question is, how do we protect ourselves and our loved ones? And it seems like the answer is if you have an elderly relative, a mother, a father, a grandparent, aunt, uncle, you got to keep an eye on some of their private financial information.
Sure. One of the things we've sort of lost in this country is that idea of close-knit families. Families aren't quite what they used to be. I think that's unfortunate. I don't think that's universal, but that is a lot. People move, people travel, people are getting older. Look, how many times did we have, my grandparents never lived to 80s and 90s. Great-grandparents barely lived to 60s. My mom's now 90. In fact, we were on a cruise 2 weeks ago for her 90th birthday. She was the oldest person on the ship, and she was the center of attention. Captain had to give her a bottle of champagne
Good
and
for
things
her.
like that.
Good for her.
And she's got all her faculties. But people are living a lot longer. But there are a lot of folks, kids have moved away, they've got their own families, it's hard to keep track, people get lonely, especially if there's a death of a spouse, and people take advantage of that.
And still, 4 out of 10 seniors across the country have been victimized in some form by some financial fraud.
But there are so many different kinds of frauds out there. So let's get away from
Give me a couple,
Oh, yeah,
so we
sure.
so we know what we're looking for the people who are watching.
So the social media scam, like I just told you about, is a big one. The romance scams. And it's hard to, because you don't have a physical person you can say took your money. They still think that maybe there's some hope there.
But once again, somebody is paying them attention, and
exactly, and it's usually what it is, the paying of attention. I convicted a fellow one time, career criminal, who said, well, after he got caught, I've got a series of profiles on how I do things. He says, probably the worst one is I target beginning Alzheimer's patients. I was like, how do you do that? He said, well, I'll call somebody. So I'll call you up and say, hey, I've got this investment, and we talk. And I don't push the investment. And I'll talk to the person for weeks, maybe even months.
now they're a friend.
And I mark down everything they say. And then I go back and ask the questions. I can predict where they are on the Alzheimer's scale. And then one day I say to them, hey, Joe, I bought those Orwell leases for you, the $25,000 that you're going to send me. You never sent it. He said, 9 out of 10 times, I get him to send the money. Now, there are other simpler scams. And you've heard about some of them. You know, the folks that call you up on the IRS and say, we're going to come take your money if you don't go to Walmart and send me a money transfer. One of the common ones right now that's going around the country is you'll get a check in the mail. And why they target more seniors than anybody else, I'm not sure, because this probably works with everybody. You'll get a check in the mail. Usually it's from something you do a lot of. So like say you go to a particular store. But let me pick something like one of the soda companies. I'm not saying they're part of it, but just to not point at anybody. You'll get a check in the mail. It's a $2,000 check. Says, you have just won the lottery of such and such. Here's your first $2,000 cashier's check. Please go put it into your bank account. Great, wow. Don't remember doing a sweepstakes with the company or anything, but you put it on in. And of course it goes through the process. But then it says, but your other $23,000 is available to you, but you got to pay $1,000 worth of tax, or $1,500. Well, we've already gave you $2,000, so wire us $1,500, and we'll send you the rest of your check. So you put $2,000 in the bank, and it starts to go through the process, but you've got 5 days to send it on in, or 3 days, and you send them $1,500. It's a counterfeit check drawn on a legitimate company with a legitimate account. So here's what happens. What happens if somebody steals a check out of your checkbook? When do you find out about it? When you get your bank statement a month later. So what happens is the company's going through its accounts and goes, a check to Joe, $2,000. We didn't issue that check. They call up their bank and says, phony check. Bank puts the money back in the company's account. That bank calls your bank and says, put the money back in our account. Bad check. And your bank takes it out of your account. Now you owe $2,000.
Wow.
But you just sent $1,500.
You have a 98% conviction rate. What happens to these people? Do they get locked up for a long time? Do they have to pay a lot of money?
It's a little bit of both.
Do they have to return the money?
If they have it, we make sure they return the money. And some we're good at, but some people, and a lot of these crooks, they spend money as fast as they can. The bigger Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes, you never get that money back. And it's so unfortunate. We had one, for example, that was going through one of the churches in Alabama, stole about $3 million. Actually, the church had to fold because even the church put up its own property as part of the investment. Wow. So they stole $3 million, 2 point whatever it was. When you track the spending, here's a guy that was going over to Atlanta every weekend, plopping down $2,000, $2,500 for a bottle of wine, several bottles every weekend, going out and buying new Corvettes. So when we put him in jail, and yeah, he got a 31-year sentence, but there's no money to return. Sometimes we get lucky. We had one, and here's the most unusual one I've ever seen. It was out of Phoenix City. It was a Christian investment program. No ads, no radio, no TV, word of mouth and internet. 14,000 victims sent him money.
Wow. How many times do people infiltrate a religious group or some kind of community organization, and they get 1 or 2 people and they convince them to invest in a certain bogus product, and then those people tell their friends and say, but I think I can get you in on this deal, unknowing that it's a bogus deal?
This is the most common of what we call the affinity frauds. Now, an affinity fraud means people like me are part of my group.
Right.
Who am I going to
trust? You can trust them.
In the South, where I am, I've seen more money stolen in the name of God than any other way because it comes through the churches. Now, if you're on the West Coast, it could be the Latino community, it could be the Asian community. I've seen it in fraternities like the Lions clubs and the Kiwanis clubs. I'm not saying they were the ones, but very similar to that.
Any club or organization could be a target. Somebody can get involved with it and infiltrate.
We've seen it.
And spread that.
Sure. You've seen it a lot in the Mormon community. You've seen it in the Amish community in Pennsylvania, in that area. You've seen it in the churches in the South. We see it on the Texas border with the Mexican community. But here's the thing. Here's somebody that says, I'm one of you guys. I'm going to help you. One of the classic ones was a church in just out of Birmingham, Alabama. Here's a guy that went on in and offered to do free tax work for the church as a member of the church. Everybody got to know him. Oh yeah, hey, he's great. You know, he's going to do this work for us, and we save some money. And he came up with the idea that, oh, and by the way, I have this fund that we're investing money in. And of course, it was a Ponzi scheme. Everybody, a couple of folks gave money, and every month they got a little check. Of course, they're getting their own money back, and they don't even know it, how the Ponzi scheme works. By the time he got done, he took them and the church for about $650,000.
Wow.
Nobody wants to prosecute. He's one of them. They can't believe it. It had to be somebody else. He got taken by somebody else. And the usual defense is, if the government hadn't stopped me, we all would have made money. And a lot of times we have to overcome that. Here's another example. We brought the case against Greater Ministries International Church down in Tampa. 28,000 victims, $678 million. I called a meeting in Tampa. I got some of the, took a piece of the Civic Center down in Tampa, and I called the victims to come together. The church members, some of those who were about to be indicted, the leaders, were there. And that's what they told the folks as they were coming in to meet with us. If you go in there, you will be excommunicated from the church and your soul damned to hell. And do you know, I'd say 50% turned around and walked away. After conviction and after it all came out, we asked them why they walked away, and they said, I lost a lot of money, but I wasn't going to take the chance that my soul could be damned to hell. The power of something like religion attached to the power of an affinity fraud, or the power of a social network that's tight, you know, that brings people together, and they cannot believe. It's so hard for them to believe that somebody could take advantage of them that's one of their own. That's affinity fraud, and that's what you're talking about.
So it's building loyalty, building trust, and then people have a hard time saying it's not true.
Well, if you tell people that your church, somebody in your church, especially if it was a minister, the best way the ministers and these crooks actually pull together and get your faith is making belief in the plan the same as belief in God. In that church in Tampa, this was, quote, God's social security plan for Christian. Not mine, God's.
That's what they called it.
That's what they called it. And these other churches and these other affinities, if us Asians don't stick together, if us in the religious community don't stick together, if us in this fraternity don't stick together, who else is going to watch out for us?
All right, so help us out. Give us a couple of tips quickly of what we should do to protect ourselves and protect our loved ones and protect people who are in our organization, whatever it may be.
You know, the first thing I'd like to do with the seniors, especially if they live alone or by themselves, get them an answering machine and teach them not to answer the answering machine of any number that doesn't look up. Normally, I would say if you recognize the number, do it. But at this point, because of the way the systems work, you can make any number look like it's a local number. Unless you recognize that number as your son, your daughter, your doctor's office or something like that, I try and my mom does this now. Just let it go to the answering machine. I'll look at it when I stop over her house. She can look at it later and go, I don't know who that is. Hang up the phone. That's one. Two, have somebody that you trust that can look at things like bank statements and account statements and things of that nature that you say, I need to make a decision on. Three, if you're not sure who you're talking to, hang up the phone. Four, before you write big checks or make changes to your financial plan, get secondary advice from somebody you trust. I'd say also, if somebody from your families want to borrow money, discuss it with somebody else in the family first. We see that as a big problem as well. It's not illegal, and we can't prosecute it because you voluntarily gave the money. But if you're depleting your own assets because somebody's trying to keep up a lifestyle, that's a problem.
And that speaks to the fact that so many of these seniors are victimized by people in their own sphere. It may be their housekeeper, it may be their helper, it may be a relative.
Yeah. It could be an outside person, like I told you about the guy that used the Alzheimer's patients. But that's a lonely factor. That's a nobody else paying attention factor. That's a factor of nobody else was looking after the person. You got the romance issues. Again, It's a factor of I'm lonely, I'm depressed, there's nobody out there, and the family's not paying enough attention. That's usually where it all evolves. Then you do have those that where they really can't handle their affairs a whole lot. And every now and then we run against one where it's clear that this person who's been living alone has no other family. And then as part of what we do, we may set up a guardianship, or the state will. We may set up somebody to oversee some of that, those assets. Does it work all the time? No, nothing's perfect. But we're trying to make a dent in that. Look, our population is growing by 10,000 people a day turning 65. You know, I used to call them all seniors and elders. Now that I'm over 65, I've decided they're life experience citizens. I really don't like that term senior anymore.
Thank you, thank you. We all thank you.
But that's kind of what we're seeing out there in this whole space. Look, we have the usual problems with products. Structured products are an issue, not so much for the seniors, but for the general population. So there are other types of frauds and issues and unsuitable products. Some are legal but shouldn't be sold.
We're talking about financial products.
Now we're talking about financial products. So those are things we also see that impact people's lives and whatnot. You know, look, we went through the crash. You know, we had a lot of subprime accounts, and a lot of the states got together, and we bring some, return as best we can to that. But these are all things you have to watch out for. And I would say that most people, they go out to buy a pair of shoes. They'll go to 5 different stores before they find the right shoe or the right jacket. But when it comes to turning over their money for retirement, it's like, I heard he's good. Here, handle it. I don't want to fool with it. And it's amazing to me that people will spend more time for a pair of shoes than he will shopping for a good financial analyst or stockbroker or investment advisor who they've interviewed and they feel understands where they want to be and where they want to go.
Such a valuable insight. Thank you for that, for the tips on behalf of all of us.
My pleasure.
Joe
Thank
Borg,
you very much.
State of Alabama. For more information on financial education and how to protect yourself, I hope you'll visit wi65.org.